further ado, let's welcome our first candidate, Evan Falchuk. Evan's from the United Independent Party. So we want to offer you this opportunity to speak more generally, to start off with, on why you want to be governor and how, as governor, you would work to expand economic.
Important. And I think increasingly, people don't recognize how important it really is. We live in a state where the cost of living is increasingly high, where the causes of this are driven by, on the one hand, healthcare costs, but the other part of it is housing costs. And housing costs have everything to do with a increasingly dysfunctional framework that's in place for community development. We've laid out a really detailed plan for this in my campaign. Now, the reason I'm running is because as a voter, I think that these kinds of issues need to be talked about. And I became very tired of hearing people in the political establishment talking in vague platitudes about these really important issues and never really wanting to commit to real serious dialogue with people that actually know what they're talking about, and challenging people to say, hey, some of this stuff costs money, but we need to do it. Some of this stuff means changing regulatory frameworks that have been around for decades that are out of date, need to be changed, and that's hard, but then what's the point of being in government if you don't want to take on hard challenges? And I believe that inside of the political parties, it's not going to happen. They don't want to change. So I decided with a group of voters to found a new political party, which is what the United Independent Party is. And the vision of it is simple. It's that everybody is equal and everybody's civil rights have to be protected, and we need our government to spend taxpayer money wisely. We need our government to actually take on these important issues of community development because they matter. They matter. They aren't just sound bites. And we need people that are willing to talk about them in the way that you hear me talk about them and what you see on our website, in ways that are practical and real and informed and aren't meant to gloss over the hard realities of the challenges that we all deal with. So that's what this is about.
Our question is whether you will provide $2 million to level fund the Small Business Technical Assistance Program in the budget you submit to the legislature next year, and what else will you do to expand access to capital and services for small businesses?
Yep, so the answer is yes. And I know it went up from $700,000 to $2 million, but we got a $36 billion budget, and CDCs are doing work that everyone will say is really important and really good, but where's the money? Where's the money? I had the privilege of working for a very short time with one of the CDCs, Interrise. My friend Gene Horstman is the CEO of it. I worked with the group in Lawrence. I'm a business person. That's what I was doing before running for governor. I speak Spanish because my father came to this country from Venezuela. And working with those small business owners in Lawrence, in helping them figure out business plans and understanding whether or not the way they wanted to go about growing their business or not, in some cases, was incredibly inspiring and valuable. And to know that we've got people at the level of our state government that think $700,000 is enough money for programs like that across the state it's really appalling. So we have to be funding these things to the maximum extent possible, which is at least $2 million. But we also have a much larger responsibility because the cost of living being as high as it is and the dysfunctional way in which we do development in Massachusetts means that all the problems that are facing communities that have poverty, communities that are disproportionately Black and Latino, do not get the ability to develop and grow in a way that they otherwise could. And it's not just about the money from the state. It's about the regulatory framework. So we laid out a plan in my campaign. You can read it, that's important, on the Falchuk2014.org website called the Thriving Communities Action Plan. My running mate is a land use and town planner. His name is Angus Jennings. He's worked in communities all across the Commonwealth. And we put this plan together saying, what are the things that make sense? So much of this has to do with making sure that the state properly funds education. Chapter 70 funding. The state is required to update Chapter 70 every 2 years. The last time it did it was 10 years ago. I know they're starting now to look at it again, but come on, it's supposed to be every 2 years. They've done it twice since 1993. So that means that education funding has stayed essentially level at a time when the cost of it keeps going up. So cities and towns acting in what they perceive to be their financial best interests say, we're going to zone for what I've heard people call child-proof zoning. Large lots, single-family homes. Maybe there'll be a 40B to make up some of the difference. And that then bothers everybody in the community about affordable housing. Gives affordable housing this very bad name. So we got to start by funding education properly, providing technical assistance to the cities and towns so they can plan for growth. They can afford to have planning on the agenda. So they can change their local zoning to plan for smart growth. You know, we have this great framework, 40R, on the books, but because the money's not there, and because cities and towns don't truly understand in many cases how to do it, we don't see 40R developments happening. We need to reestablish something that I thought was a useful tool, which was the Office for Commonwealth Development, so that we can hardwire the leveraging of both public investment and private investment in infrastructure development to help support cities and towns to plan for their own futures. This is a home rule state, and cities and towns need to be empowered to plan for their futures. But if we're not willing to talk about this, and you can see there's so much more in there. I mean, zoning reform, not even being able to have a vote for a decade is incredible to me, in spite of all the efforts that have been put forward by people to try to put that on the agenda. It gets stuck. So for all the nice talk about the need to make sure that we've got growth in our Commonwealth, there is no real pro-growth agenda that's being discussed other than if they let me in a debate, there is. But when it's not, it's not on the agenda, and we're every year waiting to say, it could have been worse. It could have been worse. So to me, I think the work that CDCs do is enormously important. It is something that is happening in spite of this broken regulatory framework, and it could be so much better leveraged if we could just change the way we do development in Massachusetts. This is what we're talking about with the Thriving Communities Plan. So yes, of course, the funding that is described here should be something that everybody should be able to agree to. Here's the problem. Any candidate for governor standing up here doesn't at least say something that sounds like yes is not a very good candidate. So this is the hard thing, because the accountability that we've got in our government really isn't there unless we elect people that are willing to stand for it and get into our government and put good bills on the governor's desk that are actually going to make these things happen. So yes, of course I support that. And again, this is a big problem, because what's happening in our state is that young people are finding they can't afford to buy a home. You know, I'm 44, I remember being in college and we would joke that there's going to be no Social Security when we get older. If you look at the young people working on my campaign, they joke about the idea that they'll never be able to own a home. I was talking to one of the young people working on my campaign the other day, graduated college, 22 years old, has $200,000 worth of debt. Now forget the fact that the house, that a starter home for him in a few years might cost $500,000. What's he going to do with that $200,000 worth of debt? I was talking to a group of students at Fitchburg State University the other day, and I asked them, I said, how many of you voted in the most recent election, the primaries, in which only 16% of voters voted, and they all had their hands down. And then I said, how many of you have a huge amount of student debt? And they all raised their hands. I said, notice the connection between these two things. When you don't vote, you are invisible. Your voice does not get heard. And we have too many people around our Commonwealth that have decided that the political process, it doesn't work, it's broken, the whole system's rigged, everybody's two sides of the same coin. And what ends up happening is that groups that have a lot of money, who are making money off the status quo as it is today, get to make policy. So these things don't take place. So housing becomes more expensive. Now the good news is, you can take that same desire to make money, that profit motive, and leverage it for the public good by having sensible housing policy. If developers say the only way I can make money is by doing a 40B or by building a single-family home on a large lot, then that's what they're going to build. If you provide them other alternatives, like a smart growth district in communities across the Commonwealth where communities have decided this is what we want to have, well then they can make money doing that. That's the vision towards not just saying we need more affordable housing, but housing of all kinds, so that young people can afford to stay, so that older people who might want to downsize can find multifamily housing to live in. You know, the reports from Northeastern about 10,000 new units of multifamily housing being needed in addition to what's being built every year. This has been out there for years. We just don't have any kind of comprehensive state policy to turn that into a reality. So that's my vision, is that we can create that. It means talking about issues that most people say, boy, this is dry. But I think it's exciting. You won't believe this, maybe you will, but I was speaking at a comedy club, and they said, so what are your policies? And I said the first thing was, well, housing. And I tried to make a joke about housing. Who makes jokes about housing? And they said, that's funny, but wait a minute, tell us what that really is. And I told them some of the stuff I just said. And this audience, which was all 20-somethings, were actually stopped the fact they were in a comedy club and started to listen. And I was like, well, that's kind of wild. We're in a comedy club, we're talking about housing? There's hope for America. So that really is my vision. We can engage people on these issues. We can show them that this is really how we're going to have sustained economic growth, because jobs follow rooftops. And making that case to the voters is what must be done, what we need a leader in the corner office who's willing to do it. I mean, to me, this is simple. Now, here's the thing, too. Where's the money supposed to come from for this? I know we're only talking about $6 million in a $36 billion budget, but the state is comfortable giving out enormous tax breaks to big companies. They give out almost $800 million worth of them a year. And we're talking about a $6 million tax credit so that private individuals can donate to CDCs and have that be leveraged. Well, our priorities are out of whack when that's happening. The legislature voted at the end of the legislative session this year to spend $1.1 billion to expand the convention center in downtown Boston. Again, what are our priorities really when you hear folks saying nice things about housing and community development, and yet the votes go in that direction, where we have to worry about whether we're going to have a governor that's going to be committed to putting in place a small but meaningful amount of money towards this kind of work that all of you do. So that's why we need new leadership.
Earlier this year,